Jamal Aziz, are you a terrorist?
Depends.
If you
What's the definition of a terrorist?
The revolution will be live.
So the situation is such that we've been hearing the Indians call basically the entire Pakistan government and our setup and our intelligence network and our army and us, all of us, as state sponsors of terrorism. Right? This is not a new narrative. We've been hearing this and can't pak gaya, honestly, listening to this again and again and again. I want to understand, where do we go from this? Like, is this where our relationship will always be? Or is there some future to it?
यार अवैस ये मसला ये ना कि मैं तो और तुम जब से like it seems कि जब से हम बड़े हुए हैं, like जब से ever since we were kids, we've been hearing कि बस पाकिस्तान दहशतगर्द है, because this is when the narrative really took hold in the early 2000s, right? And early 2000s we were like what, in our 12-13 years old,
we were but
youngsters
थे,
ठीक है, तो हम तो सुनते थे कि पाकिस्तान दहशतगर्दी का ये नैरेटिव्स थे और हमारे मुल्क में टेररिस्ट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है और सेंचुरीज़ हैं, हम धमाके करते हैं, फिर हमारे मुल्क में धमाके शुरू वाकई हो गए, एंड वी हैव बीन फाइटिंग ऑल ऑफ दैट. सो इट्स वेरी कंफ्यूजिंग बिकॉज हमारा मुल्क का नैरेटिव है कि भाई हम वी आर द बिगेस्ट विक्टिम्स ऑफ टेररिज्म, सो वी आर द बिगेस्ट विक्टिम ऑफ टेररिज्म, सो हाउ कैन वी बी डूइंग टेररिज्म?
It doesn't necessarily make sense. Like there's no real link between you being suffering from terrorism and so what is it that we have to say?
You see, अभी मसला ये है कि इंडिया ने साफ पता चल रहा है कि ये एक मजाक बन चुका है. इंडिया की वैसे भी इट वाज ऑलवेज ऑल सीरियस एनालिस्ट्स, पॉलिसी मेकर्स, जो भी थिंक टैंक, एकेडमिक्स, एवरीवन नोज दैट इंडिया मीडिया इंडस्ट्री जो पूरी जो ये इनका सेटअप है, इट्स अ जोक. बट इस क्राइसिस में तो हमारा ये लॉन्ग स्टैंडिंग पोजीशन फॉर द होल वर्ल्ड वैलिडेट हुआ है. कल पाकिस्तान इन लाहौर भी तबाह हो गया, आसिम मुनीर साहब हो गया. यू सी दैट इमेज ऑफ दोस जहाज़ को दिखा रहे थे कि ये देखें नाजरीन, जनरल्स जहाज़ों में निकल रहे हैं, पाकिस्तानी जनरल्स वर लीविंग द एयर स्पेस, दे हैड एयर स्पेस की पिक्चर्स. तो इस चीज़ में अभी ये इंडिया की वी न्यू कि ये टेररिज्म का नैरेटिव इट वाज अ क्या कहते हैं, the ultimate false flag, the ultimate fig, क्या कहते हैं, fig leaf कहते हैं, what's the word?
It was a false image that they had been trying to create, right? It was a strategy of statecraft. It was a lawfare maneuver where they were utilizing legal mechanisms, international legal mechanisms,
international
to malign Pakistan. हाँ.
देखिए 9/11 के बाद जो tailwind बना, उस ज़माने में वो unipolar moment था, brief वाला. अमेरिका, no one could challenge the Americans. 9/11 shocked the conscience of the
Americans
world.
make bloodlust आई.
हाँ, हालांकि उससे पहले भी ये 98-99 में ये US bombings हुई थी केन्या, तंजानिया में, कोल में, ओसामा बिन लादेन. We had started hearing about these narratives, but 2001 brought it into global focus and the war on terror. उसमें ये बड़ा साफ था कि इंडियंस ने इस पोजीशन को, इस अपॉर्चुनिटी को कैश इन किया एंड टू पिन पाकिस्तान डाउन. बट उस ज़माने में मुश्किल था बिकॉज पाकिस्तान वाज a key ally for the US. billions of dollars was coming in. President Musharraf का टाइम था, कोऑपरेशन बड़ी हाई थी अफगानिस्तान में. So it was difficult for them to immediately pull us down, even though they started using the narratives, and the Israelis did the same in Palestine. Self-determination को convert किया into terrorism.
Okay, no, but so essentially, just to clarify for viewers, before this, that one man's terrorist was another man's freedom fighter, there was equal woe on both sides, right? You had UN resolutions that were coming out, UN General Assembly resolutions that were coming out annually, right, up till maybe even 1994 and stuff, which kept on saying that freedom struggles जो हैं, national liberation movements जो हैं, occupation को हटाने वाली जो movements हैं, all of those were justified even when they used armed force.
Yes.
Or by any means available.
The American Journal of International Law में आर्टिकल्स होते थे, अभी तक अवेलेबल हैं बाय स्कॉलर्स लाइक माइकल राइसमैन स्टफ, जो
टॉप अमेरिकन स्कॉलर्स,
टॉप दे यूज्ड टू क्लासिफाई द मुजाहिदीन, मतलब द रेजिस्टेंस टू द सोवियत ऑक्यूपेशन ऑफ अफगानिस्तान वाज क्लासिफाइड एज अ वॉर ऑफ नेशनल लिबरेशन. दे वर कॉल्ड मुजाहिदीन, ठीक है, एंड इट्स यूज्ड टू से दैट third states are obligated to support their struggle That struggle was not limited to moral, diplomatic, political support. Armed struggle को आप support कर सकते थे. And it said that the Soviet Union or the government in Kabul cannot classify this support as illegal.
Okay.
ठीक है, तो ये एक context था. It worked in Afghanistan spectacularly, and it was only logical for the success of this movement to move into other occupied territory, which was Kashmir. Right, and you saw the Kashmiri Intifada, और 90s में इंडिया बड़ा बैकफुट पे था. इंडिया बैकफुट पे था because it itself was supporting resistance movements in Namibia, and several others in Africa.
This is when it used to be a good member of the Global South.
Yes.
And
SWAPO था, African National Congress था, even Palestinian movement को there used to be support on this, and so because self-determination 1990s तक बड़ी उसकी value थी, और self-determination post World War II order का self-defining principle था. Article 1 of the UN Charter is on self-determination. It's all about decolonization. 9/11 changed that script.
So let me just get it. When Pakistan was supporting freedom fighters in Kashmir, right, Indian occupied Kashmir, everything that we were doing was justified in line with UN General Assembly resolutions, in line with international law, in line with the principle of self-determination. Then there was a global shift where you had one hegemon, the US, saying that now any sort of violent struggle will be considered, it was just easier to label any type of violent struggle against the state as terrorism. States found that wonderful because no state wants violent struggle against it, right? So it could say कि within my borders जो भी violent struggle होगी वो terrorism है, किसी और के borders में हो तो वो तो freedom fighting है, right? So इस type का एक dichotomy बन गई थी.
इसमें ये चीज़ थी कि you see, generally the international law में principle of non-intervention was also applied in the 80s and 90s. You couldn't send your own nationals across the borders, but you could support through material support
indigenous
movements, and that was wo. So law of non-intervention, but the law of non-intervention was very loosely followed. It was loosely followed, but after 9/11 it became very strictly wo. ये एक वो UNSC resolution 1373 का मेन चीज़ ये थी कि सेफ हेवंस को आपने डिनाई करना है,
नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स पे
फोकस था, रेजोल्यूशंस आए, प्रिस्क्रिप्शन के मैकेनिज्म्स आए. अच्छा, इशू ये हुआ कि we know that there was a UN resolution on terrorism, UN Convention on Terrorism has been pending since the 80s in the UN. और उसकी ये जो शुरू को पॉडकास्ट में बात हुई, one man's terrorist was another man's freedom fighter. The main deadlock even today, 40 years later, is what is the definition of terrorism? तो what happened in 9/11 was that the US bypassed this, because उस ज़माने में remember जब 9/11 हुआ तो US की fury इतनी peak पे थी कि no one could dare
stand in the way.
Would stand in the way. So the 1373 resolution came out, I believe it was on 28 September 2001. So literally 17 days after 9/11, and that's a mini convention. So whatever a UN resolution UN convention sought to achieve, a Chapter 7 resolution of the Security Council, which is binding on every country in the world, created that mechanism. कि यार तुमने हर मुल्क ने criminalize करना है, हर मुल्क ने terrorism को, you have to target terrorists where they are, you have to deny them safe havens, you have to do mutual legal cooperation. ये सारी सबके ऊपर बातें आ गई. But again, what was the mechanism? Who is a terrorist? So what the UN did was that there was another resolution called 1267, which came about after the US bombings in Kenya. 99 की resolution है या 98 की है. That was known as the Taliban, Osama bin Laden Taliban resolution.
Al-Qaeda Taliban, हाँ.
Al-Qaeda Taliban. And then, so that was the frame, because उन्होंने ये decide किया कि it doesn't matter how you define a terrorist. If you are on the 1267 list, you are a global designated terrorist.
Yeah, okay. So go ahead, because I want to discuss something about this list. इस list में अभी भी वो लिस्ट चल रही है, उसमें ISIS को भी इंक्लूड कर दिया, they've expanded this, but it's still very much focused on Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Daesh, and
Islamic terrorism.
So any attempt at so but common imagination में ये आ गया कि इस लिस्ट पे जो होगा वो टेररिस्ट है.
बिल्कुल.
But if there is Indian terrorism, for example, वो इस लिस्ट में फिट नहीं आते, right? If there is terrorism in some other part, Europe or something like that.
Basically anything other than Islamic organizations अगर ना हो, तो that's not, it doesn't even come in the parameters of this resolution. ठीक है. Now what has happened is, अच्छा वो resolution क्या कहते हैं? What does a Chapter 7 resolution require? You see, the UN cannot enforce, it cannot tell a country convict this person. cannot because trial नहीं करा सकते आप. You can. It's not a global adjudication body. So what the sanctions list does is that it says that if you are on this list, every country in the world has to do three things. One, they have to make sure that this organization or this person is denied funding. So जो भी, if you have bank accounts, if you have, you cannot run an organization.
तुम्हारी property freeze हो सकती है.
Property freeze हो सकती है. Even things like you cannot, how can you anything that requires the use of money.
Okay. Bank accounts, financial assets, everything.
Yes, ठीक है. Secondly, if you have any weapons, they have to be confiscated, even if they're registered.
Cancellation of licenses, everything.
Third, travel ban. If you have passports, they have to be confiscated. Travel उसमें advisories में हो जाती हैं, so you can't travel. These are the things which every country in the world is supposed to do. Now what happened was कि इस list में जब ये entities आ गए, now when this war took place, so dozens, if not hundreds of entities were put in.
Yeah.
And because we had a porous border with Afghanistan and all of these groups were operating
in Afghanistan.
And suddenly, and by the way, these are the same groups, a lot of them जो वही मुजाहिदीन थे और वो गुट तालिबान वाला सीन था. उसमें a lot, because the criteria is very loose. It is supposed to be groups affiliated with. So Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Flana, and groups affiliate, what exact language I'm forgetting, but it's something affiliated and something two, three other things. Associated and is tarah kuch language hai. Multiple hundreds of entities were put in, including dozens, if not hundreds of entities that were based in Pakistan. Individuals and organizations.
Okay.
And a lot of those organizations, Pakistan ne khud unko list karwaya tha.
Yeah, because we were the front line.
We were the front line, right?
If Afghanistan was the epicenter for Al-Qaeda and Taliban, obviously, and Pakistan was the frontline state, yes. So obviously unne hamari bhi border pe hone tha. Exactly. So that's why we have well over 100 people that were listed on that thing. Yes. Some have died, some are off the list, whatever. Yeah. But the reason that people need to understand is, one, we were the frontline state. That's why this was done, and many, we were in favor of having them. ये नहीं था कि पाकिस्तान के state के खिलाफ ये सब चीजें हुई हैं. And the second issue is putting someone's name on that list is not based on evidence, right?
That's a very good point.
Because India has also placed quite a few people on that list, उनके pressure के through और अपने allies in the Security Council. It wasn't based on evidence. It is two things. They provide some level of intelligence, which doesn't need to be verified. Sources and methods उसके जो हैं are never revealed, right? So एक मुल्क कहते हैं हमें ये लगता है कि ये लोग terrorist हैं, और उसके बाद it is a political decision. The UN Security Council members vote on who is included. उसकी committee है, and they vote on who is then included on this list. Yes. So this is not in any way. So from a Pakistan perspective, one, this is not based on evidence. Yeah. So a lot of those people there are because it is the whim of a certain war. And secondly, Indian entities can't be on it because the list is not designed to have them on it, right? Yes. So terrorist groups like RSS, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. Now the issue is that what happened कि हमारी maligning क्यों हुई? Maligning what happened was that Pakistan did not, we didn't understand this shift that took place from self-determination to terrorism. This was abhi bad ke, hindsight is always 2020. But when these things were happening in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 1373, 1267 were not tectonic shifts that were viewed as tectonic shifts in Pakistan. We were looking at RSIL archives, Amir Bilal Sufi at RSIL was talking about this as early as October 2001. The first RSIL events that were done explaining कि यार ये एक shift आ गया है. You need to, Pakistan needs to be aware of this directional shift. We were doing it as early as October 2001, right? Now उस time पे FATF was around since 1989. In 2002 or 2003, it shifted its focus to terrorism financing. Yeah. We were also grey listed in 2005, but grey listing by FATF in 2005 meant nothing. It was a procedural form.
Yeah, technically,
2013 we were again grey listed but by 2017-18 these forums had become weaponized. So India ने mechanism ये किया कि they realized that Pakistan was weak in compliance on 1267, meaning that there were entities in Pakistan that were on this list, but yet their funding was not being choked. We didn't have the mechanisms for which a person or a banker or an entity would know how does a terrorist a globally designated terrorist, when he engages with Pakistan's financing sector, banking sector, how would people know that this is on the list? So this is where the weakness lay. This is why we went on the grey list as well, and this is because you had people, entities, famous entities, जो India-centric groups वाले हैं.
Yeah.
They would, for example, Hafiz Saeed or Jamaat al-Dawa, they would conduct rallies. They would have posters and pamphlets in Lahore. The Indians would argue before this 1267 committee or the 13, how is this person or this entity allowed to stage such large events? Where is the money coming for this?
Yeah, मुफ्त के तो नहीं होते रह गए,
right? पाकिस्तानी स्टेट का जब प्रेशर आता था हाफिज सईद पे कुछ करो, मुंबई अटैक के बाद था ना, all we could do is detain him under the maintenance of
MPWO. Maintenance of public order.
Maintenance of public order. Now, when we would detain him under MPWO, they would go to the High Court in the writ jurisdiction and say under what position, because the MPWO would say because you are prescribed at the UN, subject to our obligations under the UNSC Act and वगैरह. Their lawyers would argue before the Lahore High Court, why are we being bound by the UN? Decide this matter as a matter of Pakistani constitutional law. The Lahore High Court once or twice made these statements that we are not bound by the UN, we have to look at the four corners of the constitution,
जो technically सही बात है.
जो technically सही बात है, मगर the problem is कि वही चीज़ इंडिया सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में कहता था कि पाकिस्तान का हाई कोर्ट कह रहा है इट्स नॉट बाउंड बाय द सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल, राइट? सो these are the strategic missteps that happened when these attacks were taking place, पठानकोट, उरी पुलवामा, उसमें ये सारी सेल्फ डिटर्मिनेशन ऑक्यूपेशन की बातें ख़त्म हो गई. इट ऑल बिकेम अबाउट हाउ डू यू टेक एक्शन अगेंस्ट प्रिस्क्राइब्ड रूल. और फैटफ की जब ग्रे लिस्टिंग हुई, फैटफ की ग्रे लिस्टिंग में जो पहली हमारी रिपोर्ट निकली, म्यूचुअल वैल्यूएशन रिपोर्ट, इट फाउंड ग्लेयरिंग एरर्स. इट सेड there was no way for prescribed organizations, but there were no mechanisms to notify them. If you entered a bank account, if you wanted to get a weapons license, if you wanted to do a check, there was no check and balance. We had sections in the law.
Basically, अगर prescribe करनी थी organization, Ministry of Interior एक notification करती है और बस बात
उसके बाद बस बात होने लगी, right? या Foreign Office would have issued when it came from New York. So there was no mechanism for check and balance. People didn't know. Law enforcement agencies, CTD, FMU, prosecutors, ATC courts, none of them knew what this 1267 was, right? So, but this is where then we changed. FATF में हमारी जो ये grueling action plan हुआ, across the board we saw known as sanctions compliance. NACTA took a wonderful role, FMU, State Bank, all these organizations, the EMLCFT जो वो था, क्या कहते हैं, डायरेक्टरेट था, ब्यूरो था, so many other organizations across the country, special sections आ गए, section 1100, ATA, AMLA change हो गया, Anti Money Laundering Act.
There were tons of regulations passed by the State Bank of Pakistan.
To the point कि हमने बल्कि थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही restricted कर दिया. But now, if you are a prescribed entity, all of these and a lot of convictions took place because the law. पहले क्या था? You wanted to convict someone. If you wanted to convict Jaish-e-Mohammed, Jamaat al-Dawa, there was no evidence because Mumbai trial में जो evidence share हुआ था वो evidence ही नहीं था, फोटोकॉपियाँ दे दी थी हमें,
which would have been admissible in their own courts.
Mutual legal assistance नहीं हो रही थी मुल्कों के बीच में, cooperation फंसा हुआ था पठानकोट में, all of. So what then, when we changed these laws relating to terror financing, it became easier because domestic actions related आप action ले सकते थे, and you could convict them. Now the point is, मुझे जिस बात पे, where I feel that the Indian state is become even more duplicitous, is कि अभी ये धमाका हुआ है, and they're saying, मतलब ये जो इन्होंने अटैक किया पाकिस्तान पे, brazen attack, they are saying, look, we hit Maulana Azhar's house, Jaish-e-Mohammed house, and 12 family members of इसके लिए याल्दा हकीम भी उस दिन बोल रही थी Sky News में वगैरह. भाई, the 1267 list is not a kill list. It is not कि जहाँ मिलो तो just.
It's not, as we mentioned, it's not based on evidence. This is intelligence.
जो हमने करना था वो हमने कर लिया. उनके assets freeze हैं, उनका travel ban है, उनके weapons confiscated हैं. That's all the UNs, and they've been where the convictions were needed. Those convictions are taking place.
Yeah, and if you want further convictions, give us the evidence.
Yes. So does this justify, as lawyers, international lawyers, or कि India violates the jus ad bellum, the law relating to the use of force? Does it violate the jus in bello, international humanitarian law, killing civilians, killing members of the families, non-active part in hostilities? जो 200 साल पुराना law है, I think. Jus in bello is how old? It's from the 1800s, right?
Since forever, it's just war doctrine.
So it can do this. and now it can also suspend the Indus Water Treaty and say terrorism is. So water law, humanitarian law, human rights law, ये सारी चीज़ें law relating to the use of force, territorial sovereignty, everything goes on the side just because of terrorism, and that too a wrong understanding of terrorism. This is where I feel that this has now become a strategic imperative to really push back, because we have not been the victim of terrorism, we've been the victim of lawfare on terrorism. They have misused, and lawfare has a negative connotation. It is the misuse of law to achieve a strategic objective.
And international law and domestic law.
Yes.
Right? What I want to go and actually discuss right now is, this was a thought out strategy, right? That we will utilize and pressurize international mechanisms and utilize those, weaponize them really against Pakistan to portray it as a state sponsor of terrorism. And everything was fitting in, 9/11 happened, and then India worked on that. We were slow. Hamara domestic mechanism weak tha. India exploited that and flat. But now we've come to a point where the domestic system is improving, right? Where we can conduct these investigations, जहाँ हमारा mutual legal assistance का mechanism improve हो गया है, वो thanks to India, honestly,
Yes.
ठीक है, because of the pressure that FATF की वजह से था, हमने बहुत ज़्यादा improvements किए. And these are the same mechanisms now that help us detect Indian terrorism in Pakistan and the funding that is transferred here and a lot of those things. And I want to get to that in a point. But now what we see is,
कह रहे हैं ना कि investigation करो, third
Exactly.
party को ले आओ.
Exactly.
That's why we're telling, because we've become confident in our own
abilities
to collaborate or investigate a cross-border terrorism issue. In Mumbai, in Pathankot, in those us time pe letter rogatories used to come in. People won't even know who is the
what is a letter rogatory?
Who is going to be the authority? कोई कहता था Solicitor General है, कोई कहता था Law Ministry है, कोई कहता था AG office है. Now you have authorities, you have a Mutual Legal Assistance Act, you have they require further strengthening, further वो तो हमेशा, but I think we are in a much better position now.
Okay, so now that this has happened, India की वही जो narrative था, ठीक है, जो literally पिछले 25-30 साल से चला रहे हैं, Pakistan state sponsor of terrorism, all of that. Now that it's losing its varnish, it's losing its sheen because Pakistan has taken action. Hafiz Saeed, enemy number one in India, he's serving a 78-year sentence in Pakistan. I don't think a lot of Indians know this, right? Hafiz Saeed karte hain. If they really wanted to target their enemy number one, they would have targeted him. The problem is he's in jail, right? And they did try to assassinate him during his trials. Yeah. But we in Pakistan have imposed this punishment on him. दूसरा ये Pakistan's taken action across the board, and this has been acknowledged and has led to Pakistan being delisted or taken off the grey list, right? So this is globally acknowledged. The one thing that isn't being acknowledged, and I think that needs to be equated, is that when India accuses us of terrorism, why doesn't anybody buy it anymore? Is because it is proven that India is itself involved in assassinations and terrorism. Yes. And this is something which gives me still a bit of hope in the international community with what happened in Canada, right? The Indian assassination of Sikh Nijar, and US pressure, UK pressure, Australia was involved, and a number of countries. What's his name? Ajit Doval basically created a plan where he thought to suppress this Khalistani movement and these Sikh, separatists, we can target them on their own soil, and this will put fear in them, and they won't want to then do that. The problem was, you're not Mossad, right? And you're not James Bond, where you can go into other people's territories and start operating there. And I think there was a lot of resentment. Because look, India is the West's blue-eyed baby right now.
Foreign actors were also operating on US soil.
Yeah, and so exactly. So there was a lot of resentment that, ठीक है तुम हमारे दोस्त हो गए, लेकिन इतना भी नहीं है.
कतर में उनका spy network निकला था.
Exactly, naval related.
Australia में something funny happened as well. Then they tried multiple things. So definitely you see, I think मुझे जो interesting चीज़ लग रही है, और it's interesting but it's scary also, is that we knew that India was going on this rogue path for the past 10 years, right? And we knew, but सिर्फ ये हमें लोग कहते थे कि यार ये academic बातें हैं, these are just discussions, look at their economic rise and look at their strategic value, and Modi can do this and Modi can do that. Slowly इसकी जो जब आपकी वो कहते हैं ना नीयत साफ नहीं होती है, you come to equity with
clean hands.
You need clean hands, law का भी basic principle होता है. ये सारी चीज़ें अभी you are just seeing this
tidbits of it.
Tidbits, और ये unraveling हो रही है. whether it was assassinations and these actors, these are not things which I feel that have gone unnoticed or have not damaged India's case. अभी इनकी जो ये मीडिया की जो credibility damage हुई है, this is huge.
Yeah.
This is huge because if you're sitting and saying that Lahore has been captured and this has happened, so basically you cannot be taken seriously as an aspiring superpower. You're acting like a fool country, right? Not even a tiny
very immature country
would act like this, right? So आप बिल्कुल ही पागलपन कर रहे हैं. So this is huge as well. फिर आप जो अपने मुल्क के अंदर the hatred that you have developed, the fact that the people are have become so rabid and they're buying this and they're so angry and ये hubris and आप जो comments देखें ट्विटर पे पाकिस्तानी भूखे मरो फलाना जो गालियाँ यूज़ हो रही हैं, the language, this is really bad for your society because if your society becomes this radicalized, no matter how much high your GDP is, you are a powder keg. You will implode. But the nuksan is that when you are imploding, you will take us with you and the region with you because you're just so huge that
absolutely.
You will. So we are worried for our own.
We can actually now seeing the level of radicalization.
Yes.
And Hindu supremacy in India, you can actually imagine a serious refugee crisis on our border.
Yes.
Where you have Muslims who are trying to run away from this in the millions, perhaps, right?
They don't care. A refugee crisis, what about suspending the Indus Water Treaty?
Yeah.
What about the migration crisis that's going to cross, across the world when, these ecological disasters start happening and problems start happening? Us pe kya karoge?
So, Jamal, what I think is that a lot of the reason why we're having all of these from India, all of these decisions, some of them seem like own goals. Like, why would you affect your own social cohesion? The only reason is that you are a Hindu supremacist government, right? That is pushing this narrative that helps it win votes, but ultimately ruin the country, right? That's one thing. Secondly, what you're seeing is the same irrationality is going into its foreign policy. Pakistan ko bilkul khatam kar do, right? Jabki we know you can't just erase 250 million people. Nuclear armed मुल्क को तुम ये नहीं कर सकते, right? We also understand that it is a strategic imperative for both India and Pakistan to make peace, right? There's simply no other way. I always used to think peace is only made with hardliners, right? Because they have the enough backing and political credibility to be able to pull off a peace agreement. But this is such an irrational government that I don't think there's any chance of ever having peace with BJP in power, right? Because it is part of their raison d'etre, their ethos, really, to hate Muslims and to hate Pakistan because we are a Muslim country. Right? Now I want to get back to something. I feel that we have not taken... Now, as part of the strategy is launching terrorism within Pakistan, funding the Baloch liberation movements and their separatists over there, funding and supporting ISIS and the TTP, which is doing attacks throughout Pakistan as well, but especially in KP, our province. I think that is all part of it. The problem is that when you keep on telling other people, you need to stop terrorism, but you're involved in it yourself, you lose your credibility there. And that I don't think Pakistan has exploited effectively.
Yes.
And that has been our failure. We have not taken terrorism seriously ourselves.
Yes.
Yes. They take it very seriously. One attack and here we had Jafar Express happen. We had multiple other attacks, hundreds of people dying. And where's the condemnation? Where's the finger pointing to India? Or taking very strategic action? We should have stuck to something in India.
So you've hit multiple points in this. एक तो इसमें यह है कि definitely because we have suffered so much from terrorism, a part of our psyche has been damaged by it. The fact that 100, these are just numbers. If 2 or 3 people die, it's just a blip. No one even discusses it. जाफर एक्सप्रेस में ज़्यादा लोग मर गए या उसका नेचर इस तरह था कि
ट्रेन हाईजैकिंग
फिर भी it's not something which has captured the psyche, the national imagination. The only thing which the last time जिसने वो किया था was the APS attack, right? Now the issue is कि ये twin चीज़ें हैं. एक हमारी अपनी and I'll talk about the Pakistani angle later. बिल्कुल बात ये ठीक है कि we have not exploited this vulnerability and that's why we think it is hollow also. We know that the Indians, those people who work in this CT community know that the Indian claim is BS. They're just doing it for as a lawfare move, and because they know that they are so deeply involved in supporting terrorism in Pakistan. So the same playbook, जो अजित दोवाल का playbook है कि ये करोगे you lose Balochistan and all of these things. Now the issue is कि how the question that me and you often get asked at different forums in Islamabad and elsewhere is that how do you sustain this pressure? How the world is not going to take this seriously. Which platform should we go? हम इंडिया को ICJ लेके जाएं, कोई global court कुछ करेगा? How can they have all the media? They have all the wherewithal. How do we get the Security Council to pay attention? So as a result, because it seems hopeless, let's not do anything. Which has been our consistent position is that ultimately your narrative, the best tool to push back on India is to rely on your domestic criminal justice mechanisms.
Absolutely.
ठीक है. अगर आपको पता है कि जाफर एक्सप्रेस में ये इन्वॉल्व थे या मॉडल टाउन में हमने डॉजियर्स बनाए, कितने और चीज़ें थे, पीसी गवादर केस था, इस्लामाबाद स्टॉक एक्सचेंज केस है, कुलभूषण यादव की जो ICJ केस है उसमें पूरा हमारे एनेक्शर्स हैं ऑफ ऑल द केसेस व्हिच ही एडमिटेड टू. ठीक है. एंड आई एम नॉट इवन एन इंटेलिजेंस और अ CT पर्सन, बट यू नो देयर आर सो मेनी ऑन अ डे टू डे बेसिस. अगर ये चीज़ें हुई हैं, लास्ट वीक प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस जो हुई है, लास्ट वीक नहीं था, आई थिंक 4-5 days ago when the DGISPR played those clippings of those Indian command intelligence handlers talking to people, पहले भी ये चीज़ें हो चुकी थी. Now these things have to be converted into, and they have been, I suppose, but it's not been taken seriously, into a domestic criminal justice cases, FIRs followed by, and I want to ask you on this because this is something which, you know, criminal justice is your area. How do we utilize criminal justice procedures in a way which are credible, which are transparent, and which necessarily, because of their own motion, attract domestic and international media attention, and which attract international diplomatic political attention? You know, how do we go there? Keeping in mind that हमने जिस तरह शुरू में mention किया कि the deck is stacked against us because there is no UNSC list that deals with RSS or India, or BLA is not in it. Secessionist movements are not in it. How do we deal with it?
Okay, so I mean, so again, we are now talking about changing our tack, changing our strategy and our tactics on this. First of all, is the thing that you mentioned. We have to shift this from the dossier model to criminal investigation model. Intelligence dossiers don't mean anything. Because intelligence आप मेकअप भी कर सकते हैं, आप जो है you could have anyone do this, ठीक है, और हमने कितने dossiers.
And they don't change public opinion, ना?
Exactly.
You can, maybe some people in foreign capitals become sympathetic to you, but they're not pressurized to change their thing because international relations doesn't work on morality.
And more importantly, dossiers are secret documents. They're given to the P5. They're not made public. उनकी briefing जो होती है, but वो सामने आपको मिलते तो नहीं है, ठीक है. I can't analyze them and write articles on them, or you can't have the international community examining them, understanding them, right? So that is number one. What is a criminal investigation? It is a public process, right? That is brought to the fore. It is brought in an open court, right? And that is where India succeeded with Mumbai, right? Where these people could have been tried by military courts or something, but instead they were tried by regular courts in India, and everything was openly done. Even there, they really messed up, and
but they created through that process publicly identifiable villains.
Exactly.
उस वक्त पता चला कि जी ये डेविड हेडली है, तहव्वुर राना है, हाफिज सईद,
अजमल कसाब,
and these groups. It became because those trials were happening. Trial क्या होता है? Trial में there is a hearing that has to take place every 2 or 3 weeks. There's going to be evidence. There are going to be witnesses. There are going to be requests for mutual legal assistance. Those requests can come back to be denied. ठीक है ना? So, and everything carries media value because if a country, you send a letter of mutual legal assistance to India, should come in the media. India doesn't respond, denies, rejects, comes in the media.
Absolutely.
Right? So every step is
exactly that. First of all, India जो है itself is not some bastion of great processes. It is a deeply corrupt system itself. Look at the Samjhota Express thing.
course,
right?
yeah.
ठीक है, blamed it on the Pakistanis first. Turned out it was people who've confessed to it, Hindu nationalist RSS people, ठीक है, inspired people.
Deeply flawed trial process.
BJP comes into power, tells the prosecutor who admits to this that I was pressurized to go slow on this case or to soften up my stance. Strangely, this person is given, Asimanand jo hai, whatever his name is given, was given bail on this issue. ठीक है, so it just became this. And nothing has happened of that. Exactly. All of those people who were involved in this, because it was a Hindu-led movement against Muslims, nothing happened because of the BJP government. And in fact, BJP lawyers were helping the
we didn't
defense.
Pressure on India. हमने प्रेशराइज नहीं किया जो हमारे यहाँ पे फैमिलीज थी, विक्टिम्स थी, offering investigation support, forcing mutual legal assistance things. We could have done a case on our side.
Exactly.
Looking at it. So the problem is, Oves, that you and I have been working on the criminal justice side in Pakistan for the past 15 years. Fundamentally, our criminal justice system, despite ठीक है FATF में हमारी systems अच्छे हो गए, FATF में हमारी administrative techniques अच्छी हो गई हैं, capacity अच्छी हो गई है, coordination अच्छी हो गई है. But the problem is that ultimately the trial procedure, the trial processes are still very weak, generally. So you can't, and वो FATF ATA के साथ ताल्लुक ही नहीं है, because ultimately the criminal justice system, the criminal procedure code is 150 years old.
Yeah.
The वकील बरादरी या जो जज होते हैं या जो एग्जाम्स में आते हैं, they are taught and they spend their entire careers dealing with a certain mindset.
एक archaic culture है.
एक archaic culture है, right? उसमें हर चीज़ suspicion के साथ देखी जाती है. Modern techniques, intelligence, forensics, ये सारी चीज़ें एंटी-रेप एक्ट में आ गई हैं, मुख्तलिफ पीका में आ गई है, ATA में आ गई है, बट देयर इज अ इनहेरेंट रेजिस्टेंस बिकॉज द सिस्टम्स आर स्टिल they suffer from so many crippling capacity challenges, and this also same goes by the way in India as well. But India is not under a lawfare onslaught on this, right?
And it is the blue-eyed child of the West right now, and people are willing to take up its war. Credibility unki zyada hai, despite what we've seen.
So isme I want to just add that the criminal justice sector has to be taken, especially when it comes to ATA, Anti-Terrorism Act, it has to be seen as a strategic sector in Pakistan. Because we do know that FATF ki tarah, if we get serious behind something, we can develop the mechanism.
Absolutely.
And because the ATA is a contained mechanism, special system है और पिछले 25 सालों से चल रहा है, 1997 से आया हुआ है, so 28 years since it's been there. It is a smaller system where with focused attention, you can become really good.
Yeah.
Okay? और उसका वैल्यू ये है, this is the second point which I think is very important. This having an effective system, ATA system that works, that convicts terrorists based on modern evidence, intelligence or others, will help you in your domestic CT fight also for that terrorism which is not supported by India also, right? And this is that catharsis is missing in our society. इसलिए जब तुम कहते हो ना कि we don't care about terrorism anymore, because the public has been forced, it has been brutalized as a society. We are only used to operations, intelligence based operations, और न्यूज़ में आना कि अटैक हो गया, now they've been neutralized, right? Terrorists have been neutralized. वो कौन terrorist था, वो किस में involved था, वो कहाँ से था, वो चीज़ें हमें rule of law responses नहीं हैं. When rule of law responses don't happen, societies become brutalized and eventually they become skeptical.
Exactly.
So
that the system isn't working.
The system is not working. फिर इस तरह की बातें आती हैं कि भाई ये जो दहशतगर्दी है इसकी पीछे वर्दी है. ये narrative start taking root because people become skeptical, bitter, because everything is in the shadows.
That's exactly the thing. I want to touch on this point and then move on to intelligence and evidence. वाली जो एक बात है, पाकिस्तान में this is a governance issue. ठीक है, you have everything is behind closed doors. Everything has to be secret. जैसे हम कोई बहुत वो है यार, मैं ऐसी documents होती हैं which literally like budget related होंगी और उनको उन्होंने top secret बनाई होगी and stuff like that. यार, you need to open up. The light of day will cure a lot of your problems if
because confidence नहीं है ना. You don't open up because you see if you talk to a military official or an intelligence official in Balochistan, he is going to say यार अगर मैं open up कर दूँ तो जो prosecutor है बलोचिस्तान में जिसको कुछ नहीं पता because he is just so under resourced and periphery में है, he is going to ruin my case and this guy is going to walk, right? So let me just hold him
दूसरा ये है कि जब इंटेलिजेंस वाला, एंड विल गेट टू दिस, बट जब इंटेलिजेंस वाले दे ओपन इट अप टू द डे they open up their वो, so they're taking a very big risk, right? Because sources and methods will be revealed, and they don't want to. So if they do it, which rarely will happen, and maybe they do it because it's a big enough case, it is a huge risk that they're taking, and they expect a reward from it, that there will be a conviction or something. So to encourage that side, that the intelligence community also engages in the legal process, you need to have much stronger and much better, ability to prosecute, for judges to understand intelligence evidence ka kya hai. Now let's get to this point of intelligence and evidence. What we see is कि बस किसी ने सुन ली, आपने फ़ोन टैप कर लिया, and you've gotten this is not going to work in court. The reason is कि कोर्ट में जो चीज़ जाती है is called evidence, उसकी chain of custody होती है, the judge needs to know how this was collected, was it collected lawfully, कानून शहादत की चीज़ें मीट हुई हैं, CRPC की चीज़ें मीट हुई हैं नहीं हुई. Intelligence का जो standard is much lower, evidence का is much higher. Intelligence का standard is usually on confidence basis. We have a 70% confidence that ये बात जो है, खबर जो है, ये सही है, या ये यहाँ पे अटैक होने वाला है, या 80% चांस. When it comes to evidence, it has to be on beyond reasonable doubt, right? So the standard is much higher. And when you meet that standard, you're not only meeting it in court, you're also meeting it in the court of public opinion, right? And in the global. So when you have that evidence come in, which links terrorism to Indian funding or Indian support or Indian weapons, it becomes far more cogent and far more. We have to look at, you were talking about the process. ठीक है, FIR की दर्ज करना, that is something that comes into the news, is something we saw it with Mumbai and with Pathankot. The FIR is everything. Even in this current attack, ये जो पहलगाम का अटैक है, 10 मिनट में उन्होंने वो कर दिया, but it was a pretty solid वो accusing Pakistan automatically. So that was the messaging that they did. Then the investigation. Now the investigation is the most beautiful and most signaling process that you have in this, right? When you arrest people, like जैसे हमने ये जौहर टाउन ब्लास्ट केस में, ठीक है, you arrested this, what was this man's name? I forgot, Paul David, I forgotten his name. But he had come, he was a foreign national, came into Pakistan, got the car, did all those things. Once they picked him up, I think he was trying to leave from Karachi or something, picked him up, and they were able to get everyone else in the line. And then they did that press conference where they explained that this man, this domino led to this led to this led to that. So they've built that chain, not only for court, but also for public opinion and for the international community there. Uske baad mutual legal assistance, right? This is something we still need to work on.
Yeah.
Where, for example, if you found that there is an Indian national who is involved there, send a letter to India. Yeah. You want us to cooperate on your terrorism,
Dubai,
right?
Or if he's based on
wherever, absolutely, UK, US, whatever. Send a letter and say we require this person's testimony. Yeah. We require this person to be extradited for trial, or we require this person to provide his financial details.
Financial intelligence involved है तो फिर FMU का mechanism है, Financial Monitoring Unit है, they have their own protocols, and हालांकि they're not part of the Egmont group, which they've been trying to, but this is something which the diplomacy.
It's such a double standard. They expect you to do well, but then they're going to hamstring you as well.
Especially when Afghanistan's financial center was in the Egmont group, but not us, right? So ये चीजें तो the deck is stacked against you.
Yeah.
But हमारे पास जिस तरह you see this, ये सारी बातें तुम कर रहे हो mutual legal assistance पे, then all of these so many other things in the trial you can be asking about. But the point is that we saw on the night of 6th, 7th May that our Air Force performed wonderfully. Because why? Because it was a well-trained professional force that had been planning on these things and training and capacity and interoperability of systems.
And had the resources necessary.
The resources, interoperability of systems थी, ready थे, right? ये वक्त आ गया है कि because terrorism has become such, वो military terms में कहते हैं कि इंडिया का center of gravity है पाकिस्तान.
Yeah.
It is their main offense on this.
Before any missile is fired, the salvos on terrorism are fired before.
So this terrorism thing has become such a strategic pincer that they've used, which is now withering away, right? Yeah. Is time pe when their narrative is weaker, when we are seeing the tailwinds change, this is the time to push back very aggressively, and this is where your criminal justice system that deals with this aspect needs to be seen as a strategic sector, where they are given the tools, the ability and the strategic oversight. You see, it should not just be seen as something one of the administrative judge of the High Court looks at it. It needs to be something which at the Chief Justice level, the National Security Council, there should be maybe a subcommittee or an advisory board that looks at these things.
The performance, what are the conviction rates? How are
exactly
things happening?
Or if you know that there is an Indian involvement of a case, us case ka kya bana, us case ki kya implementation hogi, because you see criminal justice cases take years. So we have to be prepared to commit to this for years. ये नहीं होगा कि आज होगा, इसका appeal होगा, due process भी देना है.
And this
we
is
can't
not,
have a sham process.
and this is not a bad thing.
Yes.
Right? I'll tell you why this is not a bad thing.
Because it builds opinions over time.
Exactly. And it builds credibility slowly and gradually over.
देखिए Kulbhushan Yadav का जो case है. Kulbhushan, what happened to Kulbhushan? What happened to Kulbhushan? You see, ever since the ICJ said that you were supposed to review his case and for consular access, it just
fizzled out.
It's gone in the background, right? Now we just so his trial should have happened. It should have been an open trial. It's just, I don't even know.
So this is my biggest issue. You had him dead to rights. It should have been an issue where this was openly brought in, right? Maybe because it was a military operation that was involved in finding him in Balochistan and then apprehending him. So they might have had some concerns कि वो sources and methods or the way we captured him. Uska issue tha. That's why they tried him in a military court. But again, it was an espionage case. And espionage cases are tried generally in a military. So they weren't, it would have been better in my opinion agar ye publicly, openly, evidence was brought forth, clear-cut iska conviction hoti, there would have been no arguments against it. India ki main argument, one of the main arguments at the ICJ, even though it didn't have anything to do with this case and the ICJ did not talk about this, was that this was a closed military trial.
Because they're masters in this, right? They take, they take a half-truth or an ancillary issue and they try to make it the main issue, right? Or they try to take what is in their strength and make that the main legal issue. इसलिए हम भी जो हैं, again, because this is lawfare, right? Lawfare का ये मतलब नहीं है कि आप भी you also become a rogue actor, but you need to know that this is what you're up against. You need to be very shrewd and potent in your responses.
One more thing is just before we move on to the next issue is what I've seen. If you study the Indian process of the last 20 years, India has, even though its statement is that Pakistan must end terrorism, India has no intention of causing Pakistan to stop terrorism or those things. It is merely finding ways to use Pakistan as a whipping boy. Because if you look at Pakistan's strategy, after the FATF pressure and even before that, Pakistan had, जो freedom fighters को support दे रहा था, after 9/11, it significantly curtailed that, right? You didn't have the types of attacks that you had before. But the problem was कि India ने 7 लाख फौज एक जगह पे बिठाई हुई थी. और वहाँ पे there was naturally, the Kashmiri people are not happy with India. And when there was homegrown terrorism, because the BJP government couldn't take कि यार हमारे खिलाफ भी कोई terrorism कर सकता है, वो Indians कर सकते हैं, so they had to blame it on Pakistan. And so what happened was that during this entire thing, the few terrorist attacks that took place, they blamed those on us as well, even though we had nothing to do with them and our fingerprints were.
And I don't think all of them are terrorist attacks also. So you see that the thing is that ये जो तुमने बात की, now this is something which we have. If we have to push back, we have to be pushed back with some bold. Things which sound bold but they are not because they're rooted in international law. We claim, based on the facts of law, that Indian administered Kashmir is not Indian administered Kashmir, it is illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, right? हम कहते हैं कि occupation है. Why? Because India lacks the title. They're claiming a territory that they lack title to.
Exactly.
So UN Security Council resolutions की main value ये है कि वो कहती है कि title ना पाकिस्तान को गया ना इंडिया को गया. That's why we don't claim GB and AJK as an independent state. We're not in Article 1. India तो कहता है कि
in our constitution,
हमारे constitution में, right? India कहता है ये हमारा है, even though international law में title उनके पास नहीं है. Secondly, India ये कहता है they have complete control. So they have total control, 700,000 troops, military, political, सब कुछ वो. And the main point is that they are a hostile army. The Indians claim we're not a hostile army because Maharaja Hari Singh told us to come in. But they're a hostile army because modern IHL, well not modern now, ये तो tragic और ये सारे cases 30 साल पुराने हो गए. But ICTY and these different tribunals said that where the army of that occupying state becomes the very tool that denies people the right of self-determination. So
or the right to authorize their presence on their territory.
Right. So when you have massive curfews and internet shutdowns and enforced disappearances, then that army is a hostile army.
Yeah.
This is different from Balochistan because you can think about Balochistan is not disputed territory. Balochistan is not disputed territory under international law. Pakistan has title over it, lawful title over it. It could be a human rights situation, but it is not an occupation framework that applies. Now, if it is an occupation under international law, and there is an indigenous resistance to that occupation, because international law, let us not forget that until the 99, even though in 9/11 frameworks ne isko change kiya tha, that fundamental basis remains that you have a right of self-determination. And
that hasn't died down. Yeah.
And you have the right to resistance to occupation. Right?
Armed resistance.
Now, what should be the contours? How 9/11 के बाद state practices वगैरह बदल गए हैं, right? But वो जो indigenous entity है, जो कश्मीरी है या जो फलस्तीनी है, you know, the Palestinian or the Kashmiri indigenous person has the right of self-determination and has the right of armed resistance to that occupation, right? And so when that Kashmiri or that Palestinian targets an Indian army soldier or a military target, then it is not terrorism.
Yeah, that needs to be clarified.
Right?
So, for example, the bases that were attacked, right?
Exactly.
Uri, Pathankot, or these.
Exactly.
Those would be justified under international law.
Yeah.
Now, the issue is that India has labeled the organizations as terrorist organizations under its domestic law and then pushed that narrative abroad. Whereas under international law, they would not be considered terrorist organizations like that.
The
one thing that across the board, Pakistan, India, everyone should condemn is targeting of civilians.
Yes, like the Pahalgam incident.
Exactly.
Right?
And that has to be categorically condemned.
But the irony is that space for condemnation also starts coming down when you know that the other actor is a malified actor that is using this as the justification for attacking your country, for killing 31 citizens on this side, for committing war crimes. ये आप उस space को आप reduce, you create, it's not a mindset or is not actions of one that wants to resolve the issue.
It's not a rational approach.
It's not rational. It wants to agitate the issue.
Exactly.
It is used that so वो चीजें जो हैं हमें बड़ी carefully we have to push back on, and this is something. And my final point on this is that you see CT frameworks. All our discussion has shown that CT frameworks post 9/11 have been disproportionately effective. If you are on the 1267 list, all hell breaks loose. If you do not cooperate on terrorism, you are pushed and ostracized. If you don't have effective mechanisms for terrorism financing, for checking terrorism financing, you go on the grey list, right? Which can affect your economy, which can affect your... And now, as a result of, so you can rely on counter-terrorism to violate sovereignty, to attack countries, to violate human rights standards, to violate international humanitarian law, and now to violate international water law as well and treaties. So this is a disproportionate framework that has gone out of control. And countries like India and Israel have used it to the detriment of the global south, especially Muslim countries. The Americans have used it to the detriment, and so you have Israel, not just Pakistan, but Libya, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, so many other countries where it is directly being used to, destroy these countries, their sovereignty. So this Pakistan, as a leader of the global south, aspiring leader, G77, we have to take this diplomatic position that enough is enough. Terrorism is not going to just automatically allow you to run roughshod over these. What about, give us accountability for the violations of humanitarian law, of human rights law. Otherwise, CT frameworks are also not going to be taken the way way they should be, right?
Because it's as you mentioned, it's a very, very one-sided affair, this entire thing.
And make those CT frameworks beyond Islamic terrorist groups.
Absolutely.
Include other forms of it, because they are directly contributing to Islamophobia. All over the West, it's become okay, if 100 people die in a Muslim country, they must be terrorists. If a bombing took place, if children are dead, if airstrikes take place, it's okay because it's terrorists, it's okay because it's Hamas, it's okay because they are human shields, right?
And this is exactly what India counted on for its attack.
Yes.
Right? That nobody condemned, or there wasn't the level of condemnation of civilians. In fact, there was a lot of silence on the fact that civilians were actually killed. There were children who were killed.
And Pakistan has to have an aggressive state practice now that aligns itself with the Palestinian cause as well. Because
Absolutely.
Palestinian cause nahi, it is their, horrendous sacrifice that has allowed this conversation to come up once again, that there is a right to resistance, and the terrorism narrative, because that is far more open in the world. See, the Indians are trying to catch up, but Pakistan is not Palestine, otherwise we would have also been in the same position.
Jamal, we don't have a lot of time. There's one thing that I wanted to mention, that was looking at a potential off-ramp for the situation we're in. Now, right now, as we're recording, India has attacked Pakistan twice. Okay? Pakistan is looking, we've taken down 4 or 5 of their planes. India is now looking at a potential response from Pakistan. And there's a lot of pressure built up now, right, which is going to be released very soon, in my opinion. At some point, hopefully, we will have, things will settle down, we will be able to. Lekin to prevent this from happening again, you need an off-ramp, and you need something that is sustainable. We've been discussing that a counter-terrorism cooperation framework might be something that works, might be something that could be offered, that has guarantors, third countries, third parties, that ensure that there are stakes with each other. Pakistan has stakes in India's security, and India has stakes in Pakistan's security. Now, this is a massive shift in our approach, because heretofore we've just been wanting to find subconventional warfare in each other's country, cause problems and whatnot. And despite the public image, this will be a bigger U-turn for Indian national security policy than it will be for Pakistan.
Yes.
Pakistan ka agar kuch bhi hai, to it is this Kashmir issue, right? Or was at least the Kashmir issue. India is involved in Balochistan, in FATA or ex-FATA, and in mainland Pakistan. India has been involved for a long time now. And Kulbhushan Yadav was evidence in all of these attacks that are taking place and the assassinations that have been taking place. So it's a much bigger ask from India. But what it does is, from our perspective, it equates the terrorism and the violence that is happening in Pakistan with the violence and the terrorism that is happening in India, or at least what they call terrorism in India. And if you can have that comes to a place where there is a level of parity, where there is an equal footing for both. Not the bully Modi approach, कि बस हमारी बात होगी और कोई बात नहीं होगी, you deal with terrorism. Now, it seems impossible, and I completely understand this is a very difficult strategy. You start working on cooperation. But I want to ask you, what do you think this framework would look like? I know we've discussed it before, our viewers, and how would we implement such a thing?
You see, again, these are very, deep and long-term points.
Above our pay grade as well.
Above our pay grade as well. औकात से बाहर है. मगर ये issue इसमें ये है कि, you see, in Pakistan especially, everyone tends to see things based on the current environment. कि यार इस वक्त तो जंग होने वाली है, तुम लोग cooperation की बात कर रहे हो, ये तो फजूल बातें हैं, right? This is a cop-out. No one is going to listen. I think that there needs to be a body of people on both sides of the border that are quietly working on what the contours of such things can look like for a future where tensions are not that high and where practical policy suggestions, where the systems are in the place where they can absorb these things. So you need to insert them into the system at some point, even if it is not today. It doesn't have to come as an off-ramp right now.
Yeah.
वो तो off-ramp है, वो military decision है. But not just on CT cooperation, but also on Indus Water Treaty and on climate change and all of these things. You need to be talking to each other, And I think to answer your specific question on CT cooperation, जिस तरह DGMOs की hotline होती है, mechanism है जिससे ceasefire time पे, the LOC के mechanisms हैं. Similarly, you need to have standing JITs on both sides, joint investigation teams on both sides, which are crack units type, which has the best of the best on both sides, that understand the intricacies and nuances of international cooperation, of forensics, of intelligence, of evidence, of criminal procedure, of mutual legal assistance. All of these things, and obviously you will need third-party guarantors. I personally think mechanisms like, the regional anti-terrorism structure of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it has a lot of limitations. It's more of an aspirational forum at this point. But these are things to push forward. If the Americans want to get involved, the Chinese and Russians, We are still not there yet. But what would a third party guarantor look like?
Because Jamal, I asked this because the language of India's suspension of the Indus Water Treaty said that until durable steps are taken by Pakistan, this and that, and for it to save face now, and for the IWT to come back, there would need to be something along those lines. Now, I understand your point. There is going to be the legal cooperation, but I think there's another pillar to this strategy. And that would be the intelligence cooperation. Because look, when we're talking about legal, we're talking about really post-event. So an attack takes place, uske baad jo cooperation hogi, usme MLA use karo, all of these things, and we need that. But to prevent attacks from taking place, and this is, I think, where the real sacrifice for both policies, both countries' policies will be. Right? The Ajit Doval doctrine and the Pakistani whatever doctrine we have will be to have cooperation on the intelligence front, where we then say कि यार we will utilize whatever resources we have to ensure कि तुम्हारे पास से tax ना हो और तुम ensure करो कि हमारे ऊपर tax ना हो, or at least cooperate to the extent possible. This is something which requires a lot more trust and will be a lot more difficult. So that's why you start off with the legal strategy, but then it eventually seeps into that side as well. So you don't have to get to these difficult legal.
You don't have to deal with post-event
exactly
incidents.
So there is
post-event के आपके पास protocols होने चाहिए which bring down the temperature.
Yes.
Which are credible mechanisms which you can tell your own public that this mechanism has been.
So that instead of firing missiles, you send in letters, mutual legal assistance के या किसी और चीज़ के.
But वो मसला ये कि वो कैसे होगा, because Indians have crippled the mechanisms that existed for like SARC, for example, or any bilateral mechanism. The last 10 years they've tried to cut off all of these points, right?
This is why I think, and I know we talk about peace and things like that, but I think Pakistan needs to have a very robust response to Indians' attacks, right? And that is, Modi will only respect a position of strength.
Yes.
Right? So the response that we give now is something that could bring him to the table to something like this. That you won't have a next time to do more missile attacks. Because no country can live under the threat कि यार जब भी मूड हो मोदी साहब का तो यहाँ पे मिसाइल्स गिर जाएं हमारे भावलपुर पे और यहाँ पे. That's not a place where a South Asia that is livable. Right? And so right now we either re-establish deterrence and we get him to the table and say, look, this is a solution that we don't want violence either after this. But don't get it to a point where it's completely out of control, right? So, Allah khair kare, but I think that's something. There are off-ramps, but they are from a position of strength and from a position of equality and parity. We cannot have Modi be dictating to us.
And I think that while you're searching for those off-ramps and you're establishing deterrence, you also use this to push back, change the
norms,
the alignments on these things. Khas kar again, the whole point of this podcast was the terrorism thing has to be that the stain has to be removed aggressively, proactively, strategically.
And we have to make India acknowledge that the changes, Pakistan has changed its approach to these things, and no more just using us as a whipping boy.
And demand accountability for the wrongs that are being committed on our soil.
Exactly.
And on the Kashmiri soil as well.
Thank you so much, Jamal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks.
The revolution will be live.